At my mother's funeral, when everyone had left, my grandfather and his 7 friends trapped me in that back room. "Now you belong to us," he whispered in my ear. For years, those 8 respected men never imagined I was already weaving the web that would destroy everything they valued most. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dear friends. It's an immense pleasure to share a bit of my story with you today. My name is Janet Silver, a 78-year-old woman who now lives peacefully here in Pacific Grove on the California coast. The ocean became my refuge and my healing after so many storms I faced in life. Today, my days are filled with simple things that bring me joy. Every morning, before the sun rises, I prepare my coffee and walk along the beach, feeling the cool sand between my toes. They say it's uncommon to see a woman my age barefoot on the sand, but it connects me to the earth and reminds me that I'm alive, that I survived everything. After my walk, I return home and start quilting. Each little piece of fabric tells a story, you know? Vibrant colors for days of joy, dark tones for difficult moments. When I finish a quilt, I donate it to a family in need in the community. I started this work after a storm destroyed several homes around here about 15 years ago. I saw so many families with nothing to keep them warm that I gathered my stored fabrics and made my first quilt. Since then, I've made more than 200. People call me the patchwork grandma. My little house faces the ocean, very simple but very cozy. On the walls, I have photographs of landscapes that I took myself. I never much liked photos with people. I prefer to keep memories of people in my heart. The smell of coffee is always in the air, and my herb garden on the porch is my little healing corner. I have lemon balm, rosemary, basil, and other herbs that I learned to cultivate from my maternal grandmother. Oh, and before continuing my story, I'd like to make a special request. Tell me in the comments, from which corner of the United States are you watching me? And what time of day did this video reach you? With a cup of hot coffee in the morning, during your lunch break, or already lying down preparing to sleep? I love reading each of your comments and imagining who are the people who dedicate a bit of their day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let's create this chain of affection. You know, my dears, today I'm going to share with you a difficult story, but one that carries a great lesson about how patience and intelligence can be more powerful weapons than brute force. A story of how I transformed my pain into power without ever staining my own hands. It's a journey that began many years ago in a small town in rural Ohio, where appearances deceived and the good men hid terrible shadows behind their smiles. I was born in Millbrook, a small town in rural Ohio, in 1947. It was a place where everyone knew each other, and secrets traveled from mouth to mouth faster than the winter wind. Our house was away from the center, an old wooden construction with a long porch that embraced the entire property. The backyard was huge, with orange, tangerine, and cherry trees that my father, Leopold Silver, cared for with such affection. Daddy was a quiet man who worked at the town's only sawmill. His hands always smelled of fresh wood, and despite his rough appearance, he had a heart soft as butter when it came to me and my mother. From him, I inherited green eyes and stubbornness. Mama, Abigail Silver, was a teacher at the local school, a beautiful woman with hair black as night and a smile that lit up any room. She had a sweet voice for teaching and a firm one for educating. It was from her that I learned the love of books and the importance of studying. We had a simple life, but we never lacked food on the table or love in our hearts. On Sundays, after church, it was tradition to go to my paternal grandparents' house for family lunch. Grandpa Ernest Silver was a respected man in town, owner of many lands and Millbrook's only general store. Everyone treated him with reverence, tipping their hats when he passed by. Grandma Claudia was a woman of few words, always busy with housework and obedient to her husband. I remember her whispering stories to me while teaching me to embroider, always with a distant look, as if she were trapped in another place. I grew up playing hide-and-seek among the corn stalks in the plantation behind our house. My best friend was Selena, the baker's daughter, a girl with rosy cheeks and an easy laugh. Together, we made up stories, made cloth dolls, and dreamed of the day we would go to the big city to study. At school, I stood out in English and math classes. "This girl has a future," the principal would say, and Mama would smile proudly. But not everything was rosy. From a young age, I noticed something strange happened when my grandfather Ernest and his friends gathered in the barn on our property to play cards and drink whiskey. It was always the same 8 men: my grandfather, Sheriff Horace, Judge Theodore, Pastor Isaac, who only took off his collar on these occasions, Dr. E. Skay, Nicholas, the town doctor, banker Eugene, Mayor Oliver, and landowner Gerald. They called themselves the Brotherhood of the Acacia and had identical rings with a leaf symbol. Mama didn't like these meetings. When they arrived, she would take me to my room and close the door. "Don't come out until I call you," she would say with a firmness that frightened me. Once I asked why Daddy never participated in these gatherings. "Your father is a decent man, daughter," was her only response, whispered as she hugged me tightly. In Millbrook, everyone knew these 8 men controlled everything. Nothing happened without their knowledge and approval. If someone needed a loan, urgent medical treatment, or faced problems with the law, it was to them they turned. And they helped, yes, but always charged a price. Sometimes in money, sometimes in favors, sometimes in things no one dared to comment on. I remember a winter morning when I was about 10, when I saw Mrs. Ethel, who lived down the street, crying at our door. Her oldest son had gotten into a fight and was in jail. She begged Mama to intervene with my grandfather to free him. "He'll help me, but you know what he'll ask in return, Abigail. And I can't, my daughter is only 15. She sobbed. It was the first time I saw my mother confront my grandfather. She went to his house and returned late at night, with a mark on her face that looked like a slap, but the boy was released the next day. Time passed, and I grew up, observing everything with the curious eyes of a child who gradually understands the nuances of adult life. When I turned 12, Mama began to fall ill. At first it was just frequent coughs, then came fevers and constant fatigue. Dr. Nicholas said it was tuberculosis. Daddy sold a piece of land we had to pay for the treatment, but nothing seemed to have any effect. It was during this time that I began to notice the strange looks my grandfather Ernest gave me when he thought no one was watching. A shiver ran down my spine every time he called me my little princess and sat me on his lap, with his rough hands caressing my hair. Mama, even sick, always found an excuse to keep me away from him. "Janet needs to study. Janet has to help me with the medicine." She knew. Without saying it in words, she protected me as she could. Our simple life in the wooden house with the porch was transformed by Mama's illness. Laughter was replaced by the sound of her cough. Sundays at my grandparents' house became rare. Daddy worked more and more to pay for the medicines, coming home only to sleep a few hours before returning to the sawmill. And I, at 12, took on adult responsibilities. I cooked, cleaned, gave medicines, and still studied, because Mama insisted I couldn't abandon school. "Never let them take your knowledge, daughter," she whispered in moments of lucidity. "It's the only thing no one can take from you." The winter of 1960 was the coldest we had ever experienced in Millbrook. The cutting winds seemed to penetrate to the bone, but no cold was comparable to what I felt when Mama left us. 13 years. I had just turned 13 when she closed her eyes for the last time, holding my hand and trying to smile to give me strength. "Be strong as I know you are, my little one," were her last words. The wake was held in the living room of our house, as was the custom at the time. People came from all over town to pay their last respects to the beloved teacher who had educated so many children. I observed everything as if I were outside my body, dressed in a black dress that Mama had sewn for school events and that I never imagined wearing to say goodbye to her. Daddy was destroyed, sitting in a corner, receiving hugs and words of comfort that didn't seem to reach him. His eyes, always so alive, were opaque like windows fogged by time. Grandma Claudia hugged me from time to time, but her hugs were empty, mechanical. And my grandfather Ernest circulated through the house as if he owned everything, including our pain. "My granddaughter will live with me now," he announced to everyone who arrived, without even consulting my father. "Leopold needs to work, and a girl of this age needs supervision. She will have all the best at my house." I didn't want to go. Something inside me screamed not to leave my house, not to separate from Daddy. But in that town, at that time, the patriarch's word was law. And my father, broken by loss and the debts from Mama's treatment, had no strength to object. As night fell, people began to say goodbye, returning to their homes. The burial would be the next morning. Soon, only a few women were left preparing coffee in the kitchen, my father asleep from exhaustion in the chair, and my grandfather with his 7 inseparable friends, gathered around the living room table, talking in low voices and drinking whiskey. "Go rest a bit, girl," my grandmother said, gently pushing me toward my room. "Tomorrow will be a difficult day." I obeyed, although I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. I lay on my bed still dressed, hugging the crocheted shawl that Mama had made for me. Her scent was still there, and that brought me a little comfort. I could hear the muffled voices coming from the living room, the clinking of glasses, occasionally a contained laugh that seemed so out of place in that house of mourning. I don't know how much time had passed when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I thought it was Daddy finally going to bed, but the door to my room opened slowly, and my grandfather's silhouette appeared against the faint light of the hallway. "Princess," he whispered, "you shouldn't be alone on a night like this. Come with me." Something in his voice made me back up against the wall. "I'm fine here, Grandpa. Thank you." But he insisted, entering the room and sitting on the edge of my bed. His breath smelled of whiskey and cigarettes. "Now that your mother is gone, someone needs to take care of you, and I'm going to make sure you have everything you deserve." His hands began to caress my hair, moving down my face. Instinctively, I pulled away. That's when he grabbed my arm firmly. "Come with me. The men are waiting to personally offer condolences to Ernest's little granddaughter. It's an honor, you know." I tried to break free, but he was too strong. "Dad? Dad!" I shouted, hoping to wake my father. But in the state he was in, I doubt he would have heard thunder. My grandfather dragged me down the hallway to the back room where we kept tools and where, that night, his 7 friends were sitting in a circle with glasses of whiskey in their hands. When we entered, they all stood up, as if paying some kind of reverence. "Here she is, the jewel of the Silver family," my grandfather announced, pushing me to the center of the circle. 13 years just completed, pure as spring water. It's time for her to be initiated into the tradition of our brotherhood. I looked around at the faces of those men I had known since I was born. Sheriff Horace, who always gave me candy when he saw me in the town square. Dr. Nicholas, who had treated my mother. Pastor Isaac, who blessed me in church on Sundays. They were all looking at me in a way I had never seen before, with a strange gleam in their eyes that made my blood freeze. "You have sworn secrecy about what happens in our meetings," my grandfather continued, taking from his pocket that ring with the acacia leaf symbol. "Tonight is special. It's our way of honoring Abigail's memory and strengthening the bonds of our brotherhood." At that moment, I realized with terror what was about to happen. I tried to run, but Judge Theodore blocked the door. "Where are you going in such a hurry, girl? Don't you want to be part of something greater than all of us?" "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face, "let me go. My father will look for me." Mayor Oliver laughed. "Your father is sleeping like a rock. We gave him a special little medicine in his coffee, courtesy of our dear doctor here." Dr. Nicholas smiled, raising his glass in a silent toast. I looked from one to the other, incredulous. These men, these pillars of our community, were monsters disguised as benefactors. "This isn't right," I said with a trembling voice, seeking some remnant of humanity in those eyes. "My mother just died. You're my grandfather's friends. You're a pastor." I pointed to Pastor Isaac, who merely lowered his eyes, showing no remorse. God forgives everything, my child, he murmured, especially what is done in the name of tradition. My grandfather approached again, holding my chin firmly. Your mother knew about this, you know? It was supposed to be her years ago, but your maternal grandfather took her away from here before we could begin the ritual, broke the tradition, and just look what happened to him? Accidentally drowned in the river, and your mother returned to Millbrook, married your father, but always knew that one day the debt would be collected. Those words fell on me like stones. Mama knew? Is that why she always tried to keep me away from my grandfather? Is that why she had that look of dread whenever the brotherhood met? Don't believe her if she says anything, my grandfather continued, addressing the others. We'll say it's the shock from her mother's death, that she's confused, making up stories. At that moment, amidst the terror, something changed inside me. It was as if a switch had been flipped. I stopped crying. I stopped begging. I looked fixedly at each of those faces, etching them in my memory, silently swearing that one day they would pay for what they were about to do. Banker Eugene was the first to notice the change. What's wrong with her? Why is she looking at us like that? She has the same look as her mother, commented landowner Gerald, suddenly seeming uncomfortable. That look that promises revenge. Nonsense, laughed my grandfather, pushing me to the center of the circle they formed. She's just a girl. What could she do against men like us? We are the law here. And then, under the same roof where my mother's body still was, those 8 men, led by my grandfather, decided that my mourning would be the stage for their ritual of power. I closed my eyes and transported myself far away from there, to a place inside me where they couldn't reach me. I promised my mother's memory that I would survive, that I would find a way to get justice. The next morning, at the cemetery, as my mother's coffin descended into the earth, I was there, standing, with a washed face and starched black dress, as if nothing had happened. My grandfather and his friends were also there, wearing their dark suits and solemn expressions of grief. Hypocrites. They received condolences and offered words of comfort to others while giving me warning glances. No one noticed the change in me. No one noticed that the girl who buried her mother was no longer the same one who had watched over her body the night before. I had also died in a way, and been reborn with a single purpose: to survive, to take my revenge. The days that followed Mama's burial were a blur of pain and silence. As my grandfather had announced, I was taken to live in the large 2-story house that stood in the central square of Millbrook. An imposing house with dark, heavy wooden furniture, family portraits on the walls, and an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow any joy. My father would come visit me on Sundays. He was getting thinner and thinner, with deep, dark circles and a permanent smell of sawdust and whiskey. Our meetings were watched over by the constant presence of my grandmother or grandfather, never leaving us alone. I wanted to scream to him, tell him what had happened, beg him to take me away from there. But the words remained stuck in my throat, suffocated by fear and shame. "Are you liking living here, daughter?" he would ask, trying to smile. "I'm fine, Dad," I would answer, while my grandfather observed with a satisfied smile from the corner of the room. What could I say? That at night, when everyone was asleep, I locked my bedroom door and pushed the dresser against it? That I kept scissors under my pillow? That I woke up screaming, reliving that terrible night? School became my only refuge. There, for a few hours, I could pretend I was just a normal girl. I immersed myself in studies with an intensity that scared even the teachers. "I've never seen someone so young read such complex books," my English teacher commented when she found me with a novel by John Steinbeck in my hands. But even at school, I wasn't completely safe. Sheriff Horace's son, Augustus, studied in the same class and made a point of reminding me, with malicious looks and smiles, that he knew what had happened. "My dad said you're special," he whispered one day, pushing me against the hallway wall. "Said he'll take me to meet the Brotherhood one day, too." At night, when I returned to my grandfather's house, I was met with increasingly severe demands. I had to serve dinner for him and my grandmother, wash and iron their clothes, clean the entire house. "A woman needs to learn to serve," Grandma Claudia would say, never looking me in the eye. I knew that she knew. Her silence was a form of complicity, and there were the meetings. Every 2 weeks the brotherhood would meet in my grandfather's living room. On these days, I was locked in my room early. "For your own protection," my grandfather would say with a smile that made my stomach turn. I could hear the voices, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. Sometimes female voices were heard too, young girls from town who were brought to serve the important men. Some of them I knew from school. After those nights, they wouldn't appear for days, and when they returned, they had the same empty look that I saw in the mirror every morning. On the rare occasions when I saw my father, he seemed increasingly distant, as if he were gradually disappearing. "I'm going to Cleveland to look for work," he said one Sunday, 6 months after Mama's death. "When I get established there, I'll come get you." But I knew he would never come. Cleveland was just an excuse to escape the painful memories of Millbrook, the empty house without Mama's presence, the daughter who now lived with the father-in-law he secretly despised. I didn't blame him. Part of me wanted to escape too. One autumn afternoon, almost a year after that terrible night, I was in my room when I heard a heated discussion downstairs. I silently went down the stairs and hid behind the kitchen door. "She's asking questions, Ernest." It was Dr. Nicholas's voice, tense and worried. "Wants to know details about Abigail's death if there weren't other treatment options." "And what did you tell her?" my grandfather replied with his always controlled voice. "What we always say. Advanced tuberculosis, treatment unavailable in our region." But she didn't seem convinced. "She's investigating other deaths too. Old man Myers last year, young Marlene's 2 months ago." My heart raced. Other deaths? What did my mother really know? "She's too smart for her own good, just like her mother," sighed my grandfather. "Watch her more closely. If she continues with these questions, she might need a special treatment from the doctor." I froze upon hearing those words. They were talking about me. They were planning to silence me as they might have silenced my mother. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. Upon entering my room, I locked the door and fell to my knees, breathless. They had not only violated my body that terrible night, they might have killed my mother. Or at the very least, they didn't treat her properly when they could have. That same night, when everyone was asleep, I risked leaving my room. I silently went down to my grandfather's office, a forbidden room where he kept his documents and where the brotherhood occasionally met for more official matters. The door was locked, but I knew he hid a spare key in the frame of the painting in the hallway. With trembling hands, I took the key and opened the door, closing it behind me. The moonlight entered through the window, partially illuminating the environment. The solid wood desk, the bookshelves, the liquor cabinet. I began to search through the desk drawers, trying to find anything that might help me understand what was happening. In the third drawer, I found a record book. Opening it under the faint moonlight, I saw a list of names, dates, and values. Some names I recognized, people from town who had asked the Brotherhood for help. Next to each name were notes. Land in the south of town. Eldest daughter. Services at the town hall. Permanent silence. I continued searching, and at the bottom of another drawer found an envelope with photographs. Photographs that made my blood freeze. Young girls, some of whom I knew from school, in situations that no girl my age should see. And in several of them, there they were, the 8 men of the Brotherhood with their acacia rings. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly put everything back in place, but kept one of the photographs where all 8 members were clearly identifiable. I hid behind the heavy velvet curtain at the moment the door opened. It was my grandfather in his silk robe, with a glass of whiskey in hand. He looked around, suspicious, as if he sensed that someone had been there. He approached the desk, checked the drawers. For a terrible moment, I thought I would be discovered. But then the telephone rang in the living room, startling him. After one last look around, he left, closing the door. I waited a few minutes, my heart almost coming out of my mouth, before leaving my hiding place. I quickly returned to my room, hiding the photograph between the pages of my diary, which I kept hidden under a loose board under the bed. That night, lying in the darkness, I made a decision. I couldn't face them directly. They were too powerful. I couldn't run away. They would find me. I had only one option left: to be smarter than them, to observe, to learn, to discover their weaknesses. And one day, when they least expected it, to use that knowledge against them. The frightened girl who had been dragged to that back room on the night of the wake was slowly giving way to a calculating, observant, patient young woman. I began to pay attention to everything. Conversations interrupted when I entered a room, names whispered, documents briefly left unsupervised. "You're different, Janet," my grandmother commented one day as I served tea. Quieter. "I'm just adapting, Grandma," I replied with a practiced smile, "learning my place." She nodded, satisfied with the response, without noticing the double meaning of my words. I was, in fact, learning my place, not the place they wanted me to occupy, but the place from where I could observe them better, collect information, plan. Weeks turned into months. My father rarely appeared, and when he did, he was increasingly dejected, consumed by drink and guilt. My 14th birthday came without celebration. At school, I became even more withdrawn, speaking only when necessary, observing everything. One afternoon, returning from school, I passed by Judge Theodore's house. His wife, Mrs. Matilda, was in the garden, watering the flowers. Seeing me, she waved for me to approach. "How are you, Janet? It's been a while since I've seen you at church on Sundays." "I've been studying a lot, Mrs. Matilda," I answered, forcing a smile. "Your grandfather must be proud," she smiled, but there was something sad in her eyes. "You know, sometimes I think you young girls are lucky to have such respectable men taking care of you. Not everyone has that protection." Something in the way she said that made me pay more attention. There was bitterness in her voice, a hint of resentment. "Are you all right, Mrs. Matilda?" She looked around, as if checking if we were alone. "So many years married to a man everyone respects, and what do I have to show for it? An empty house and marks no one sees." She discreetly pulled up her sleeve, revealing bruises on her arm. "The town judge, the man who decides the fate of others, can't control his own anger inside the house." At that moment, something illuminated in my mind. The men of the Brotherhood weren't invincible. They had secrets, weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and I was beginning to discover what they were. The winter of 1962 arrived more rigorous than normal in Millbrook. I had turned 15, and in the eyes of the town, was the exemplary granddaughter of the respected Ernest Silver, studious, obedient, quiet. Few noticed the permanent dark circles under my eyes, the result of sleepless nights, or the way I involuntarily shrank when a man came too close. For almost 2 years, I lived in that house like a shadow, moving along the walls, becoming almost invisible. And in that time, I transformed myself into an attentive and patient observer. Each time the Brotherhood met, I found ways to listen to their conversations, hidden behind doors or through the ventilation duct that connected my room to the office downstairs. I noted everything in notebooks that I kept hidden: names, dates, business deals, secrets. Slowly, I was putting together a puzzle whose pieces could one day destroy them. My father didn't return to get me. The few letters I received from him from Cleveland were brief and superficial. "Hope you're well, working a lot, miss you." I responded with equal brevity, never revealing anything about my real life. He had become another ghost, someone who existed only in increasingly distant memories. On a Friday in July, I returned from school and found the house in a commotion. Maids were frantically cleaning. My grandmother was supervising the preparation of a special dinner. "What's happening?" I asked Zelda, the cook. "It's the Brotherhood's anniversary, girl," she replied in a low voice. 15 years since the founding. Your grandfather is bringing important people from Cleveland." My heart accelerated. More Brotherhood members, or just special guests? "You'll serve at the table today," my grandmother informed me, entering the kitchen. "Wear the uniform I left on your bed." The uniform was a simple dress, but much shorter and tighter than anything I would normally wear. I swallowed hard, but nodded obediently. At 7 in the evening, the guests began to arrive. The usual members of the Brotherhood, of course, but also 3 men from Cleveland: a state representative, a senior judge, and the owner of a construction company. I positioned myself discreetly in the corner of the room, serving drinks as requested, trying to appear invisible while I observed and listened. The conversation revolved around a big project: the construction of a new state highway that would pass through Millbrook, greatly increasing the value of the surrounding lands. Lands that, coincidentally, had been acquired by the Brotherhood members in recent years. "The official route will be approved next week," commented the representative, emptying his glass of whiskey. "Thanks to our friend the judge here, the public action against the project was shelved. And Mendoza's construction company is already prepared to start the works," my grandfather completed, smiling. "In 2 years, our properties will be worth 10 times more." "A toast to the Brotherhood of the Acacia," proposed Judge Theodore, raising his glass. 15 years of prosperity and many more ahead. As I served another round of drinks, I felt the representative's gaze following me around the room. A man in his 50s with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. When I approached to serve him, he held my wrist. "Ernest, you didn't tell me you had such a charming granddaughter," he commented, his eyes traveling over my body in a way that made me feel naked. My grandfather smiled, that smile that I had learned to fear. "Claudia is at her sister's house in Worthington," he said, referring to my grandmother, who had left after serving dinner. "Janet is a good girl, always ready to please our special guests." The meaning of those words hung heavy in the air. I felt my stomach turn, but kept a neutral expression. It wasn't the first time my grandfather had insinuated something like this, but they were usually just words. Since that terrible night, the Brotherhood had never touched me again, as if I were my grandfather's exclusive property, or as if they were waiting for some special moment. And perhaps that night was that moment. The meeting continued, with more drinks and increasingly loud laughter. Around 10, my grandfather nodded to me. "Janet, why don't you show Representative Olympio our collection of liqueurs in the office? I'm sure he would like to try that special whiskey we keep for occasions like this." The representative smiled, getting up. "It would be my pleasure." My legs were trembling as I guided him to the office. Once inside, he closed the door and served himself a drink, observing me with those cold eyes. "So you're Ernest's famous granddaughter," he said, approaching. "He talks a lot about you in our meetings in Cleveland. Says you have a special talent for keeping secrets." I backed up until I felt the bookshelf against my back. "You should return to the room, Representative. The others will miss you." He laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to scratch the air. "They know very well what I'm doing here. This is how we seal our most important agreements in the Brotherhood. Sharing what we have that's most precious." His hands were on my shoulders now, heavy, suffocating. I closed my eyes, that terrible night 2 years ago returning like a tsunami. No, not again. I couldn't survive this again. "Please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Come on, girl. Your grandfather assured me you're already experienced in this." He laughed again, his breath of alcohol and cigar enveloping me. "Or are you going to tell me that the story of the initiation was exaggerated?" Initiation. That's what they called what they had done to me. As if it were an honor, a ritual. The anger, which I had kept carefully controlled for so long, began to boil inside me. "Does my father know what you do?" I suddenly asked, trying to buy time, my mind working frantically. The representative seemed surprised by the question. "That drunk? Don't worry about him. Actually, he's in Cleveland working for me. Or rather, he was. We had to let him go last week. good employee, but the drink. It was as if something snapped inside me. My father was working for this man? The same man who was now trying to... The circle was closing. The cruelty was complete. I know it seems frightening at first, he continued, misinterpreting my silence. But you'll learn to like it. They all learn. That baker's daughter, what was her name? Selina? Resisted at first, but now... Selina, my childhood friend. It had been months since I'd seen her at school. Now I understood why. In a quick movement, the representative pushed me against the desk. Enough talk. At that moment, something inside me broke, or perhaps finally fit together. With a strength I didn't know I had, I pushed him away. No, I said, my voice strangely calm. You're not going to touch me. He seemed astonished for an instant, then his face contorted in anger. Who do you think you are, you? Before he could finish, I grabbed the bronze letter opener from the desk, a heavy, pointed object that my grandfather used as a decoration. If you take one more step, I'll scream so loud that everyone in the room will hear, and then I'll tell them about the documents. What documents? He asked, suddenly cautious. The ones that prove you diverted campaign money, the ones that show how Mendoza's construction company paid bribes to change the highway route. The documents my grandfather keeps in that drawer over there, as a guarantee that you will never betray him. It was a complete bluff, based only on fragments of conversations I had heard over the months. But the expression on his face told me I had hit the nail on the head. You're bluffing, he said, but there was doubt in his voice. Want to risk it? Because if I scream, if I tell what you're trying to do to me, my grandfather will want to silence me. And the only way to do that will be opening that drawer, and then everyone will see what's in there. For a long moment, we stood motionless, in a silent impasse. Then, slowly, he backed away, adjusting his tie. You're smart, girl. Smarter than your grandfather realizes. Go away, I whispered, still holding the letter opener. Say you're feeling ill, that you need to return to the hotel. He studied me for another moment, then nodded briefly. This isn't over. You don't know who you're messing with. Neither do you, I replied, surprising us both with the firmness in my voice. When he left, I closed the door and fell to my knees, trembling uncontrollably. What had I done? What would happen now? Would they come after me? Kill me as they might have done with my mother? I stayed there long enough to hear the movement in the room, the representative announcing he needed to leave, apologies being exchanged, doors opening and closing. Then footsteps in the hallway, heavy, determined. The office door opened violently. My grandfather was there, his face red with anger. What did you say to him? I got up slowly, still holding the letter opener. The truth. What truth? He advanced, threatening. About the documents, about the bribe, about the highway. He stopped, his face going from red to white. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough, I replied, surprising myself again with my own calmness. I know about the brotherhood. I know what you do with the girls in town. I know that you might have killed my mother. His hands closed into fists. You think you can threaten me? In my own house? You are nothing, Janet. Nothing. Maybe not, I agreed. But what I know is worth a lot. And if something happens to me, other people will know too. It was another bluff. There was no one I trusted enough to share what I knew, but he didn't need to know that. He studied me for a long time, eyes narrowed. What do you want? The question caught me by surprise. What did I want? Freedom? Revenge? Justice? I want to leave here, I finally said. I want to live with my father in Cleveland. Your father is a drunk with no job, he spat. He has no conditions to take care of you. Then send me to a boarding school, in Cleveland or even further away. Tell everyone you want to give me a better education, that you're preparing me for college. I could see the gears turning in his mind. If he sent me away, he would get rid of a problem. but he would also lose control over me. And in return? He finally asked. In return, I won't tell anyone what I know, not now at least. A long silence followed, heavy with calculations and considerations. Finally, he nodded, once, brusquely. Boarding school in Cleveland. You leave next weekend. But understand one thing, Janet. If you ever open your mouth about anything you think you know, no one will believe you. And even if they do, no one will do anything. We are untouchable in this town. I kept my gaze steady, despite the fear eating me inside. Maybe in this town, Grandpa, but the world is bigger than Millbrook. That night, locked in my room, I cried for the first time in a long time. They weren't tears of despair, but of relief mixed with determination. I would leave. I would escape that hell. But it wouldn't be the end. It would just be the beginning. Sitting at the desk, under the weak light of the lamp, I began to write in a new notebook. At the top of the first page, in careful letters, I wrote, "The Fall of the 8 Pillars." Below, the names of the members of the Brotherhood of the Acacia, followed by everything I knew about each of them. It was little still, but I would have time, years, if necessary, to complete those pages. At that moment, kneeling beside the bed, I made a silent promise to my mother's memory. They will pay, Mama, each one of them, not with blood, but with something they value much more. Their precious reputation, their power, their place of respect. I will take everything from them, one by one, and they won't even realize it was me, until it's too late. On Sunday, I left for Cleveland. My grandfather told the story we had agreed on. His brilliant granddaughter had received a scholarship to the prestigious Our Lady of Sorrows School, where she would be prepared for college. The entire town of Millbrook commented on the event, seeing in it the generosity of a devoted grandfather. If anyone noticed the contrast between the girl's fragile body and her eyes aged by suffering, no one commented. Our Lady of Sorrows School. The name seemed a cruel irony of fate, but for me, it represented liberation. It was an old mansion with thick walls and high windows, run by strict nuns who kept the students under strict discipline. For many, that regime was a prison. For me, coming from a hell disguised as home, it was a refuge. Your grandfather left specific instructions, informed the Mother Superior, Sister Consolata, a tall woman with an angular face and perceptive eyes. You must not leave the school without written authorization from him, nor receive visitors other than himself. I nodded silently. I already expected this. My grandfather wouldn't risk letting me circulate freely or talk to my father. However, she continued, observing me carefully, here within these walls, you will be safe from everything and everyone. There was something in the way she emphasized those words that made me look up. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I had the disturbing feeling that she knew. Not the details, perhaps, but something about my situation. You have your mother's eyes, she said softly. Abigail was my student many years ago. My heart skipped a beat. You knew my mother? A sad smile touched her lips. Very well. A brilliant young woman, determined. She also came here in unusual circumstances. The pieces were beginning to fit together. My mother had studied there. Maybe she had been sent for reasons similar to mine? Could the Brotherhood have existed for that long? Rest today, said Sister Consolata, getting up. Tomorrow your classes will begin. And Janet. She hesitated at the door. If you need to talk, my door is always open. In the months that followed, I immersed myself in studies with an intensity that impressed even the most demanding nuns. Mathematics, literature, history, sciences, I absorbed everything with an insatiable hunger. If knowledge was power, as my mother said, I would become powerful. 3 times my grandfather came to visit me. Brief and tense meetings under the watchful eye of Sister Consolata, who insisted on being present during the visits. A school rule, she said, although I suspected it was special protection for me. "You look well," he commented on the third visit, his eyes studying my face for signs of rebellion. "I am," I replied simply. "Keeping our arrangement?" "Of course." "And are you keeping your part?" A muscle twitched in his face. "Your father asks about you." I felt a pang of hope. "Is he all right?" "I got him a job at Cousin Augustus's sawmill here in Cleveland. He's been sober for 2 months. He paused, as if deciding how much he should reveal. "He doesn't know you're here. He thinks you're studying in New York." Another lie. Another manipulation. But I showed no reaction. "Thank you for taking care of him." My grandfather seemed surprised by my gratitude, as false as it was. "We're family, after all." "Yes," I agreed, keeping my gaze fixed on his. "And family is everything, isn't it?" That night, after he left, I sought out Sister Consolata in her office. In the months I spent there, we developed a relationship of mutual respect, but I had never completely opened up. Perhaps it was time to take a risk. "Sister," I began hesitantly. "My mother studied here because she was running from something, didn't she?" She observed me for a long moment before slowly nodding. "Your mother arrived here at 16, sent by your maternal grandfather. She never spoke openly about the reason, but there were signs." "What signs?" "The fear in her eyes, the nightmares, the way she trembled when a man approached her." The nun sighed deeply. "I've seen the same signs in other girls over the years, and now in you." I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I held them back. "What happened to her afterward?" "She graduated, went to college in Cleveland, became a teacher, met your father, got married." Sister Consolata paused. "And then, for some reason I never understood, she returned to Millbrook. I advised her not to go, but she insisted she needed to face her fears." "She faced them," I whispered, "and it killed her." The nun extended her hand, covering mine. "Janet, what really happened to your mother?" At that moment I made a decision. I couldn't carry that weight alone. I needed an ally, someone with connections, someone beyond the Brotherhood's reach. "I need to tell you a story, sister, about 8 powerful men and a ring with the symbol of an acacia leaf." In the hours that followed, I told everything. The wake, the terrible night, the 2 years living under the same roof as my abuser, the discoveries about the Brotherhood, my negotiated escape. I spoke until I was hoarse, the words coming out like poison being expelled from my body. When I finished, Sister Consolata remained silent for a long time, her face a mask of controlled indignation. "I always knew something was wrong in Millbrook," she finally said. "Girls arriving here with the same haunted eyes, the same vague stories about educational opportunities. But I never imagined something so systematic, so perverse." "You believe me then?" "Completely, and I will help you." "How?" I asked, a thread of hope lighting up. "I have connections, Janet. My brother is a district attorney in Cleveland. We can go to the police, file a formal complaint." I shook my head vehemently. "No, they are too powerful. They have friends everywhere. Any official investigation would be suppressed, and then they would know I spoke. And if they know—" I left the sentence incomplete, the fear implicit. Sister Consolata studied me for a long time. "Then what do you suggest?" "Revenge," I answered simply. "Not with violence or public scandals that can be manipulated, but by destroying what they value most, their reputation, their power, their place in society. One by one, methodically, without leaving traces that lead to me." A heavy silence fell over us. I could see the internal struggle on the nun's face, the desire for justice against the Christian principles of forgiveness. "It's not revenge," she finally said, as if reading my thoughts. "It's justice. And justice, true justice, cannot be obtained through official channels in this case." "Will you help me?" I asked, almost without breathing. "I will," she answered with a firmness that surprised me. "Not as a religious woman, but as a woman, as someone who failed to protect your mother and will not fail you. In the years that followed, Our Lady of Sorrows School became more than a refuge. It became my base of operations. Sister Consolata, using her respected position and her extensive connections, began to collect information about each member of the Brotherhood. Her brother, District Attorney Henry Montgomery, without ever knowing all the details, provided access to official records, archived investigations, rumors in legal circles. At 18, I graduated as the best student in my class and entered law school in Cleveland. My grandfather, satisfied with my apparent conformity and good conduct, agreed to finance my studies. Another way to keep me under control, he thought. Little did he know that each law class I attended, each law book I devoured, each contact I established in the legal circles of the capital were weapons I was sharpening to use against him and his cronies. It was in college that I finally found my father. A casual encounter on the street in front of a cafe. He was thinner, older, but sober, and with a gleam in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. "Janet?" he asked incredulously. "My daughter?" We hugged right there on the sidewalk, crying openly. He told me he had been working at the sawmill for 3 years, that he had a small apartment, that he had joined a support group for alcoholics. He said that my grandfather told him I was fine, studying in New York, but that I didn't want to see him until he completely straightened himself out. "He lied, Dad," I said, holding his hands. "I've been here in Cleveland the whole time." We met regularly after that, gradually rebuilding our relationship. I never told him the whole truth about what had happened that night at the wake. I didn't want him to carry that weight, or worse, to try some impulsive action against my grandfather. But he knew something terrible had happened, something that had profoundly changed the girl he had known. "I'm going to fix things, Janet," he promised in one of our conversations. "I don't know how, but I will." "You don't need to, Dad," I replied, hugging him. "I'm taking care of it." In 1968, at 21, I graduated in law. My father was in the audience, proud. My grandfather, too, satisfied to be able to show off his lawyer granddaughter to his acquaintances. By this time, I had already built a network of contacts and information that extended far beyond Cleveland. Former schoolmates, now spread across the country in positions of relative influence. Sister Consolata's brother, now a federal judge. College colleagues working in prestigious law firms. The first domino piece fell almost by accident. The Brotherhood's doctor, Dr. Nicholas, came to Cleveland for a medical congress. Through contacts at the hotel where he was staying, I gained access to his room and planted compromising documents. Falsified records of illegal abortions performed at his clinic, with forged signatures of patients who were wives of influential men in the region. An anonymous tip led the federal police to find the documents. The scandal was immediate. Even without concrete proof of the documents' authenticity, the mere suspicion was enough to destroy his reputation. His wife filed for divorce, his clinic lost patients, and eventually he left Millbrook, discredited and ruined. I observed from afar, through newspapers and reports from Sister Consolata, who maintained contact with people in the town. A strange feeling invaded me, not exactly satisfaction, but a kind of cold confirmation. The plan worked, and it was just the beginning. The second to fall was Sheriff Horace. A confidential investigation into police corruption, discreetly initiated by District Attorney Henry Montgomery at my request, revealed a bribery scheme that he commanded. The evidence, carefully collected over months, was overwhelming. He lost his position, was prosecuted, convicted. The third was banker Eugene. Documents about fraudulent loans and money laundering, found by a central bank auditor during a routine inspection, led to the intervention in the bank and his preventive arrest. For Mayor Oliver, the strategy was different. Anonymous letters sent to his wife revealed an affair he had maintained for years with his secretary. Compromising photos, obtained through a private detective hired by Sister Consolata's brother, were attached. The family scandal, added to accusations of misuse of public funds that coincidentally arose at the same time, destroyed his political career. Landowner Gerald was the fifth. Old property documents, proving that part of his lands had been illegally taken from small farmers decades before, were discovered in the registry archives and delivered to the affected families. A collective land claim process, supported pro bono by a prestigious Cleveland law firm where, coincidentally, I interned, resulted in the loss of almost half of his properties. For Pastor Isaac, the fall came through a brave young woman who, encouraged and protected by me through Sister Consolata, denounced the abuses she had suffered. Other victims emerged. The diocese opened an investigation, transferred him to an isolated monastery in rural West Virginia. Judge Theodore, perhaps the most difficult due to his position, fell when recordings of compromising telephone conversations, made with equipment provided by District Attorney Henry, who had suspected him for years, were anonymously sent to the Court of Justice. The recordings revealed influence peddling, sentence selling, abuse of power. His compulsory retirement was announced discreetly to avoid greater scandal to the judiciary, but the news spread. One by one, over 5 years, the pillars of the Brotherhood were crumbling. The last, my grandfather, observed, powerless, the destruction of his circle. At 72, isolated, with health debilitated by pressure and constant fear of being the next, he maintained only a fraction of his former power in Millbrook. In 1972, I received a phone call from Sister Consolata. My grandfather was hospitalized, victim of a stroke. The doctors gave no hope. "Will you see him?" she asked softly. "I will," I replied after a long pause, but not as the granddaughter he knew. 2 days later, I entered the hospital room in Millbrook. My grandfather was unrecognizable, fragile, diminished, connected to tubes and devices. His eyes opened when I approached the bed. "Come to see me die?" he asked in a weak voice. "I came to say goodbye," I replied calmly. His eyes narrowed, studying my face, my well-cut suit, my confident posture. There was nothing left of the frightened girl he had known. "It was you," he whispered, not a question, but a statement. "All this time, it was you." I sat in the chair next to the bed, looking him directly in the eyes. "I promised Mama, you know, that night. I promised that you would pay for what you did." A solitary tear ran down his wrinkled face. Of regret? Of anger? Of fear? I'll never know. "Why?" he managed to ask. "Why didn't you just move on with your life?" "Because you were the disease, Grandpa. The disease that killed my mother, that almost killed me. The disease that infected this entire town." I paused, my voice firm. Someone needed to remove the tumor. He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, there was a clarity in them that surprised me. "You are stronger than all of us," he finally said. "Stronger than your mother. She tried to fight, but head on. You understood how power really works." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I got up, adjusted my purse. "Goodbye, Grandpa." When I reached the door, his voice reached me, almost inaudible. "You won, Janet. The Brotherhood is over." I turned one last time. "No, Grandpa, I didn't win. I just did justice." He died that night. At the funeral, 3 days later, I stood beside my father, both in silence, watching the coffin descend into the earth. None of the former Brotherhood members attended. The town of Millbrook, without fully knowing what had happened in recent years, only felt that an era had come to an end. As I left the cemetery, my father squeezed my hand. "Is it over now?" I looked at the horizon, at the distant hills beyond the small town that had been the scene of so much suffering. "Yes, Dad, it's over." But it wasn't, not completely. There was still a part of the promise to fulfill. The most difficult part, perhaps. Learning to live, not just survive. Finding some kind of peace. Today, sitting on the porch of my house in Pacific Grove, watching the sea that extends to the horizon. I think of the long road that brought me here. 78 years. Who would have thought I'd come so far? After everything ended in Millbrook, I decided it was time to truly live, not just survive or take revenge. My father came to live with me in Cleveland. I bought a small but comfortable apartment with the money from my grandfather's inheritance, an irony that didn't escape me. He lived for another 15 years, slowly recovering the joy that drink and mourning had stolen. He went back to working with wood, but now making small handcrafted furniture that he sold at craft fairs. His hands, once calloused from heavy work at the sawmill, became incredibly skilled at creating small works of art. "I think I inherited this from your maternal grandfather," he would say with a shy smile. "He was a carpenter, you know, before he met your grandmother and became a merchant." It was good to see him reconnect with a part of himself that had been lost, just as I was trying to do. He died in 1987, peacefully, in his sleep. He was 65, not a long life, but one that ended in peace. And that comforted me. As for me, I continued in law. Not in prestigious firms or high-profile cases, although I had offers. I preferred to work with the most vulnerable, women in situations of domestic violence, abused children, families threatened by the powerful. My personal experience became a tool to help others. Each time I got a protective measure for a threatened woman, each time a child was removed from an abusive home, I felt that a small portion of the debt to my mother was being paid. In 1975, I met Gabriel, a history professor at the university. A gentle man, with kind eyes and infinite patience. When I told him my story, not all at once, but gradually as trust grew, he didn't back away horrified or look at me with pity. He simply hugged me and said, "You are the strongest person I've ever met." We married in 1977. We didn't have biological children. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely. But in 1980, we adopted Louisa, a 5-year-old girl who had been through an abusive situation. She had the same frightened eyes that I saw in the mirror as a child. Perhaps that's why when I saw her at the shelter, I immediately knew she was my daughter. Raising Louisa was the greatest challenge and the greatest joy of my life. Seeing that broken child slowly flourish, learn to trust, to laugh, to dream, it was like witnessing a daily miracle. Gabriel was a wonderful father, patient on the bad days, celebrating each small progress on the good days. Together, we formed a safe home where the painful past could be acknowledged, but didn't define who we were or who we could become. In 1995, when Louisa graduated in psychology, I cried throughout the entire ceremony. She had transformed her pain into an instrument of healing for others, just as I had done with law. The cycle of pain was being broken, transformed into something positive. What greater victory could there be? Gabriel and I lived together for almost 30 years. He passed away in 2003, victim of a fulminant cancer. "Don't cry for me," he asked in his last days, holding my hand. "We had a beautiful life together, more than many achieve in 100 years. After he was gone, I felt lost for a time. I retired from law, although I occasionally continued to provide consulting for NGOs that worked with victims of violence. Louisa, already married to Henry and mother of 2 children, my dear grandchildren Matthew and Claire, insisted that I move closer to them. "Come to the coast, Mom," she proposed. "The sea air will do you good, and the children need their grandma nearby." That's how I ended up in Pacific Grove, in this house facing the sea. At first, the change was difficult. At 63, starting over in a place where I knew no one seemed scary. But Louisa was right. The sea has a healing effect. There's something in the blue vastness, in the constancy of the waves, in the rhythm of the tides that puts things in perspective. Gradually, I built a new routine. The morning walks on the beach, coffee at sunrise. I began to attend the local church, not out of religious conviction, but for the sense of community. I met other widowed ladies, exchanged recipes, participated in reading groups. And then came the storm of 2010. one of the worst the region had ever seen. Houses destroyed, families homeless. The small fishing community north of the beach was especially hit. The next day, when volunteers gathered to help with cleaning and reconstruction, there I was, a 63-year-old lady rolling up my sleeves. "Ma'am, you don't need to do this," a young firefighter told me, concerned as he saw me carrying debris. "We all need to do something," I replied simply. That night, seeing so many families without clothes, without blankets, I remembered the quilts my maternal grandmother had taught me to make as a child. I still had skillful hands. I still remembered the stitches. I went to the attic, where I kept a box with scraps I had accumulated over the years, remnants of Gabriel's clothes, of Louisa as a child, pieces of old curtains. My first quilt was for a 6-year-old girl, daughter of fishermen, who had lost everything in the storm. When I gave her the gift, her eyes shone in a way that filled my heart. "It's so colorful," she whispered, hugging the quilt against her chest. "It looks like a rainbow." Something lit up inside me at that moment. A purpose. A way to give meaning to the years I had left. I began to make more quilts, each one unique, with patterns that told stories through colors and textures. Quilts for newborns, for brides, for the elderly in nursing homes, for families in difficulty. Each stitch, each scrap sewn with care, was a way of saying, "You matter, your story matters." My grandchildren, Matthew and Claire, now 30 and 27, come to visit me regularly. Matthew followed in his grandfather's footsteps and became a history teacher. Claire is finishing her degree in oceanography. "I'm going to study this sea that you love so much, Grandma," she told me when she chose the course. Louisa and Henry live in San Francisco, 2 hours from here. She has a clinic where she treats traumatized children. He is a civil engineer. They come to visit me on weekends, always bringing some news, some story to share. During vacations, everyone stays here. The house fills with voices, with laughter, with life. Sometimes Louisa watches me sewing and says, "Mom, you turned scars into art." She knows. Not everything, but enough to understand that each quilt I make is also a form of healing, of giving new meaning. Each stitch, each scrap joined to another, is an affirmation. The broken can be remade, the torn can be repaired. What was discarded can gain new value. I don't talk much about the past, about Millbrook, about the brotherhood. It's a story that belongs to another time, to another Janet. But I also don't deny my trajectory. The scars are part of who I am, even if it no longer hurts to touch them. The last time I returned to Millbrook was in 2015, 55 years after the events that marked my life. The town had changed a lot, larger, more modern, unrecognizable in many aspects. I visited the cemetery, left flowers on my parents' graves. I passed by my childhood home, now a small inn. The current owner, upon learning I was born there, insisted on showing me the renovations, proud of the improvements. "This house has good energy," he said, as we walked along the porch that was once the scene of my childhood games. "They say there was a lot of suffering here in the past, but I think it was exorcised. Now it only brings joy to those who stay." I smiled, thinking that perhaps he was right. Perhaps places, like people, can be redeemed, renewed, reborn. Now at 78, sitting on my porch in Pacific Grove, watching the sun set over the Pacific, I feel a peace that I never imagined possible in my youth. It's not a perfect or complete peace. There are days when the memories return, when I wake from a nightmare with my heart racing, when a smell, a sound, transports me back to that terrible night. But it's a sufficient peace, a peace earned. A peace woven, like my quilts, from broken fragments, transformed into something new, something warm, something that protects and comforts. And perhaps, in the end, that's the true revenge, not the destruction of those who hurt me, but the building of a life they couldn't take from me. A life of meaning, of beauty, of connection. A life that says, "You didn't win, I won." Not for having brought you down, but for having risen again. My dear friends who have followed me to this point, I want to share with you some truths I've learned in this long journey that is life. If you're going through difficult situations, through abuses that seem endless, through injustices that seem too big to face, I want you to know you are not alone. And more importantly, there is a path beyond the pain. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our capacity to start anew each day. When I look back, I see that each new beginning, at the boarding school, in college, as a lawyer, as a mother, as a grandmother, was a silent victory over those who tried to define me by the trauma. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. When I look in the mirror today, I don't see the terrified girl from that terrible night, nor the calculating young woman who planned her revenge for years. I see a woman who, despite everything, chose to live fully. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Even in the darkest moments in my grandfather's house, there was a spark in me that refused to die. Cultivate that spark. Protect it as your most precious possession. My experience taught me that our story doesn't end in the painful chapters. What happened to you is just a part of your story. It's not all of it. You are much more than the traumas you suffered, much more than the hands that tried to diminish you. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. Strength doesn't come suddenly, like a revelation. It builds day by day, resistance after resistance, choice after choice. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. The scars remain, yes. There are nights when I still wake up startled. There are memories that still hurt. But these scars don't prevent me from dancing in the rain with my grandchildren, from feeling the sun on my face, from loving and being loved. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in getting up every time. Every time I felt broken and found strength to take one more step, I was rebuilding myself, stronger, wiser, more complete. If you're suffering at the hands of someone who should protect you, know that there is a way out. I'm not saying it's easy, nor that the path is the same for everyone. Each situation is unique, each available resource is different. But there are people who can help. Counselors, teachers, social workers, community organizations, support lines. Don't be ashamed to seek help. Shame belongs to the abusers, never to the victims. In every country, in every city, there are people dedicated to protecting the vulnerable. Seek them out. If the first door you knock on doesn't open, knock on another and another until you find someone who can help you. Your life and your dignity matter, no matter what they've told you. To those who witness the suffering of others, a neighbor, a schoolmate, a family member, don't look away. Often, all a person in an abusive situation needs is someone who believes them, who extends a hand, who says, "I see you." My sister Consolata was that person for me. Perhaps you can be that person for someone. And if you're on the other side of the storm, as I am now, if you survived, rebuilt yourself, found peace, share your story when you can, as you can. Not to relive the pain, but to show that it's possible to go through it. Your words can be the light that guides someone through the darkness. I discovered that my voice, even trembling, has power when I decide to use it. Each quilt I make, each story I tell, each hug I give to someone who suffers is my voice saying, there is life beyond trauma. There is beauty beyond pain. There is love beyond fear. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance and living well is the best revenge. It's not about forgetting, nor about forgiving the unforgivable. It's about refusing to allow the evil done to you to define who you are and who you can become. My dear friends, thank you for having listened to me to this point, for having walked with me on this road of difficult memories and renewed hopes. You've given me a great gift, the opportunity to transform my story into something that might illuminate the path of others. If my story touched your heart, if you recognized yourself in some part of it, please do something right now. Subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell to receive updates. Each subscription gives me strength to continue sharing stories that can make a difference in someone's life. Share this video immediately with someone you think needs to hear this message of hope. You never know who is suffering in silence, needing exactly the words you heard here today. Your sharing can literally save a life. It can be the extended hand that someone is desperately waiting for. And if you watched until here, leave in the comments the word resist. This will show me that you really heard my story, that you are with me in this mission of transforming pain into hope. Do this now. Don't wait even one more minute. Together, we can create a chain of strength and healing that reaches all corners where pain still reigns. Always remember, our scars tell our story, but we choose how that story continues. And I chose, and choose every day, that mine continues with love, with purpose, with hope. May yours also be so.